So, psychology of addressing people about money. There's negatives. People often feel threatened by discussions of money. Some people believe that what they do with their money is nobody else's business. People feel that money matters are more private than spiritual matters, sometimes even more private than sexual matters. Given today's kind of sexist front page news approach, that's not surprising. There are multiple preferences regarding directness or indirectness when discussing finances. And negatively, some people are prone to suspect greed on the part of anybody talking about money. Okay? If you're in a position of spiritual leadership, the question is, do you just want more? Okay. Well, let me just make a comment. I don't think pastors should complain about what they're paid. Okay? Let's say that you're being severely underpaid. Who is ultimately responsible for taking care of you? Isn't it God? Are you basically, when you complain, aren't you saying God's doing a poor job of taking care of me? Okay. So, it may be that your church people are doing a poor job of taking care of you. That's possible. But ultimately, this is about God. So, entrust yourself to God. Never complain in private or in public. I can't imagine anybody complaining in public, but most certainly never in public, but even in private. Because, it's like Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, do not criticize the king in your bedchamber, for a little bird will take it to him. Now, I do think that there are positives about addressing money. One is, many people have never been taught anything about the biblical view of money. Okay? And I think it's also equally true that many people have no idea how to budget or why they're in debt. Okay, so it's a rather a shame to have people who are languishing financially when, if there was teaching provided, they could be rescued. I think there are mistaken ideas about giving, greed, and wealth that hinder God's people. Everything from, if I give God 10%, all the rest of it's mine, and I can do whatever I want with it, to tithing's Old Testament that's got nothing to New Testament, so there's no obligation to give at all from a New Testament perspective. Or kind of misapplication of John Wesley's get all you can and give all you can. And Wesley's quote that if I find me with more money than it takes to bury me, you know I've stolen from God. Well, I appreciate Wesley's passion for giving. That's certainly not a biblical principle. Okay? I mean, how could Solomon say that a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children if he only dies with enough to bury him? Okay. Now, I want to talk about, as we talk to people about how to do this, let's ask the question, how should love for God and love for others shape the way a pastor addresses his people about their money? So, on the love for God side of things, all the material we've already covered, I'm not going to recover here, about divine ownership, about glorifying God. If there's any text that I would add here, it'd be 2 Corinthians 4:7. What does a man have that he has not received from the Lord? Or we could add James 1:17. Every good and perfect gift comes down from above, right? So, since here's another positive I just thought of. That is that we can correct our society's insistence on discontent. Godliness with what? Contentment is what? Is great gain, yeah. So we're actually seeking the gain of our people when we teach them about being content with what God has given us. Now, I was in high school and I had to do a project looking at magazine advertisements and identifying the philosophy behind the advertisements. Anybody ever done that? Something like that? Okay, yeah. Well, just grab a magazine off the shelf. Grab a gun magazine off the shelf, okay? And look at the advertisements in there. What appeals are made? Okay? If you get a clothing magazine, let's say Land's End or something like that, what appeals are being made? And see if they aren't saying to you, you deserve better. You need more, right? Discontent. So love for God focuses on the fact that God owns it all, God gives it all, God deserves it all, but He gives it to us for our management, for His good and His kingdom. Love for others. I'm seeking others' best interest in the blessings of God that accompany the biblical use of money. Okay? There are blessings that come from honoring God. Right? What does Malachi say? See if I will not pour out a blessing on you which you're not able to contain. This is God's heart. There's the blessing of freedom from debt and financial pressure. There's the joy of being able to meet other people's needs. It's more blessed to give than it is to receive, Acts 20:35. We're seeking our people's best interest in protecting them from the snares, destruction, and ruin that pursuit of wealth brings. 1 Timothy 6:9. Luke 12:20, thou fool, tonight thy soul shall be required of thee. So we're loving them by seeking to protect them from divine judgment upon distrust of God to provide. So, okay, if that's the psychology of addressing people about money, how do we do this? Well, let me just tell you some ways that it has been done. I know Darrell Lee Stetler II has run David Ramsey's Peace University 3, 4, or 5 times out there at the church where he's at. What are the benefits of using Ramsey? Well, number one, he's a nationally known figure. Number two, it's not the preacher telling people how to handle their money. Okay? That's a benefit. And you're there if they have questions. You can then serve as a counterbalance. Sometimes Ramsey's little line about save like no one else so that you can live like no one else starts to sound a little on the greedy side of things. Okay. And you could be there to balance that. I think a series of Sunday school lessons. So my least favorite way of addressing this would be in a sermonic form because it's monologue. I want people to have an opportunity to talk to me, ask questions. Okay. Now, on the positive side, if you have a sermon series, you can lay it out and say, I'm going to preach 8 sermons, and here's the topics I'm going to address as we go along. And if you lay it out ahead of time, what that's going to let people know is, oh, the question I have actually is down here in sermon number 6. I don't have to ask it after sermon number 1. Okay. But you could do the same thing with the Sunday school series of lessons. Let them know the topics ahead of time as well. Okay. A little more indirectly, if you preach through 1 Timothy, you're going to address things about money. If you preach through the book of Philippians, you're going to come to the, I've learned to be content in whatever state I am. Right? So just an expository ministry will provide some direction, but where's the text that says budget your money? Okay? Well, you're going to be preaching through Proverbs. Okay? To go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, kind of a thing. Chapter 27, I looked on the field of the sluggard and took advice. Some of these texts. I don't know that you have to choose between. You can use a whole range. You know, my encouragement to you as pastors will be preach expositorily through books of Scripture regularly. Your goal is to do what Paul says in Acts 20. You know that I did not refrain from preaching the whole counsel of God's Word. Okay? On the other hand, mix in a Peace University. Mix in a Sunday school lesson. Because, right, if you know anything about congregations, it's not the same people every Sunday, every time, for 20 years. There's a lot of fluctuation. People come and go. And so you need a variety of venues to provide the scope and the layering of information. Okay. Now, I don't know if you guys have paid attention to this, but you'll find when you start preaching that people don't remember what you preached. And so the idea that, well, I had a sermon once 5 years ago on finances. Okay. They don't remember that sermon. So in the old days, my dad had a overhead projector sitting on the pulpit that he actually wrote the outline on the projector as he preached. And then people took notes as he wrote. I actually prefer that to PowerPoint from this standpoint. What I've observed is when I teach with a PowerPoint on the screen, kids, audience, people think, the information's already there, I don't need to do anything, and so they're not as engaged. If I'm writing on the board, I have to write slowly, right? So I can't dispense the information faster than I can spell it out on the board. That gives people time to do it as well. So you can play with that and have it be scripted on the PowerPoint, kind of move across the screen at a writing speed kind of a thing. But yeah, Dad preaches from a PowerPoint every Sunday. You can enhance it by having blanks, handouts with blanks that they fill in, and then the keywords are underlined on the screen kind of a thing. Lots of ways to strengthen people's retention that way. Good question. Other questions? Now, if I were a pastor, so this is a pedagogical suggestion. Pedagogy. You familiar with pedagogy? The method of teaching. Okay? Here's my suggestion. Find out people's questions before you start talking. Okay. So if you're going to do a series on something that you know that's potentially controversial or touchy, find their questions. Talk privately to people who express fears and reassure them that, so say for example, I'm going to preach on homosexuality. Okay, if I walk up to the pulpit and say I'm preaching on homosexuality tonight, the mother with her 3-year-old child sitting there doesn't know what level of explicitness I've decided to incorporate into my sermon. She's immediately going to be fearful. This guy's going to be talking about, I don't even want my kid knowing the word homosexual at 3. Okay. Well, why should I spring something like money on them? Let me let them know ahead of time. Solicit questions and also solicit fears. What fears do discussions of money raise for you? And then address them privately. Reassure them that they don't need to be afraid. Okay. Now, some people might be afraid that, well, one of my fears is that you're going to say that God has some say over my money. Well, believe it or not, the Bible actually does say that. You can choose not to come when I preach on the topic. But there's a verse in James that says, "He that knoweth to do good and doeth it not." Okay. There we go. All right. So that's on the front end. Here's in the process. Be sure to provide concrete, practical means to implement the practices you are suggesting. So, it's really unkind to preach a sermon on the importance of managing your money properly and not providing people with an explanation of how to set up a budget and how to run a budget. Or let's say they've got credit card debt, they've got a car loan that they're paying off, and they've got a house mortgage. Let's show them these debt reduction snowballing devices, okay? And we'll put out on the church website or on the Facebook page a link to resources that enable them to move forward. Okay. And I would say focus on the positives consistently. Okay. This is not about the obligation that weighs us all down and burdens us. This is about the blessing of being in a place to receive God's blessing, of being in a place to give God's blessing. I would solicit testimonies that reinforce the blessings of tithing, giving, sharing, and so on. Okay? The psychology of motivation. Okay? And we ask the question, what motivates people to do stuff? Well, real simple. Pleasure. Okay? And there's a pleasure-pain ratio. And so you have to identify the way in which the pleasure will significantly outweigh the pain. Okay? Now, some of your people, they don't even have a computer in their home. They don't have a smartphone. So if the only way in which you provide access to resources is electronically, you've cut out maybe 55 and up who never got onto the computer revolution. So you got to provide paper stuff. Okay. Let's say, well, we're posting DVDs on our videos on our website about this. Well, what about burning some DVDs for the people who are cool and hip because they just replaced their VHS with DVD player. Okay. So people get excited about what offers a good ROI, return on investment, and what's doable. Okay? So, I sit and listen to some of these guys pitching the way they invest their money, and they're making great returns and making lots of money, but I say that's not doable for me. I don't have 8 hours a day to be playing with the market like these guys have. Okay? And I'm not convinced I've got the smarts that even if I did have 8 hours a day, it would make any difference. So doability, or put it, user-friendliness, is crucial. Now, I think that you ought to field test your user-friendliness ideas. Run it by your wife. Run it by, if you have kids that are 8 or up, run it by your kids. If they don't get it, then some of your lower-end adults aren't going to get it either. Okay? It wouldn't hurt to have run it by your leadership circle before it hits the congregation, so that if there's any objections from board members or people in positions of authority, why not solicit? This doesn't have to be a one-man show. Let's run this by the spiritual leaders in your congregation and get everybody's input on this. And then you can say, well, Brother So-and-so said this, and Brother So-and-so said this, and that way you've got all this group support. I think oftentimes as pastors, we people are tempted to be a one-man band. We don't have to be. Let's say that somebody in the congregation has come to you for advice that involves finances. Then you're going to offer to mentor them. Maybe you don't use the word. Maybe you say, what if we meet once a week and I teach you some of the things that they taught me in college about this? I didn't know this stuff until somebody sat down with me, and I'll be happy to sit down with you and share the things I've learned. As you share with them, what are you doing? You're generating a story. You're generating an ally. And then they can become your duet. Instead of a solo, we got a duet. All right? Yeah. And don't expect it to be super easy, because most people have habituated bad patterns of thinking about money. It's like my wife said to me, she said, is there something, am I missing something, Phil? I keep having friends text me and tell me about these great deals at stores where it's buy one, get one free. And when I ask them about the price of the one they're buying, it's actually, so let's say that, we're buying a rump roast, get one free. I say, well, what does the rump roast being sold for a pound? $3 a pound. Or, no, it was actually $8 a pound. $8 a pound. And so Marianne said, I think, okay, $8 a pound divided by 2, that's $4 a pound. $4 a pound is no big deal. I mean, a good sale is going to get you down around 3 or maybe under 3. Why is this such a great deal to buy one, get one free? Well, people, she said, anytime I ask the question, what are they selling it per pound, people look at me like there's something wrong with me. Okay? Well, these are actually college-educated people that my wife's talking with. So if that level of capacity doesn't push past the obvious in sales, then what's your high school or high school dropout? So you're going to have to be patient. You're going to have to be slow, teach them to think, show them concrete examples. Don't pull any gotchas on them. Okay? You're like, well, duh. Then you make them feel stupid, and nobody wants to feel stupid.